to have all of you here, and we are excited for this to truly turn into a discussion because we have an intimate group and we are looking forward to having an interactive conversation about engaging employees in social impact. I'm Seth, as many of you know, because this is a group of familiar faces. I have the joy of leading the Baumhart Center here at Loyola University Chicago. And I am going to very briefly welcome you and then right away turn it over to Catherine Pisco, who is the Director of Goodness Solutions at Benevity. And then you are going to hear a panel discussion with 4 individuals who are looking from different angles at this question of engaging employees in social impact. We have 2 leaders in the corporate space looking at this topic directly from a social responsibility standpoint at Morton and NVIDIA. Then we have Mila, who is looking at these topics from one goal, as well as a consultant and managing partner of Quarter 5. And then Shalane Walker, who's a media director at Wavemaker, and who is engaging in social impact and who is coming from the employee side. So a very exciting discussion ahead. And with that, let me turn it over to our fabulous partner, Catherine Pisco, who is the Director of Goodness Solutions, what an awesome title, at Benevity, to get us started on the strategic overview of how to engage employees before we jump into the case studies. Catherine?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Seth. I'm really honored to participate today and so glad to have kind of an intimate group on the line. Hopefully makes for some great discussion. I'll just kick us off today before we go into the fabulous panel to just give a little bit of an overview of what we're seeing in the space as it relates to how some companies are really being successful with engaging their employees around purpose and social impact initiatives. I've been feeling incredibly fortunate during this kind of challenging and unique time to be working in this space, as I'm sure many of you feel the same way. And I figured I'd kick us off by just a brief introduction to Benevity so you can kind of understand the lens from which I'll be giving this overview. And then we'll really dive into some of the key trends and share some stories and statistics we're seeing before we go into the panel. For those of you that don't know, Benevity is a B Corporation, and our goal as a business is to really help companies empower their employees to have them show up as the best versions of themselves and find their personal purpose. Our corporate purpose is actually to infuse a culture of goodness in the world. And we do this through technology. So we are the leading provider of workplace giving, volunteering, and granting software. And because of the fact that some of the world's most iconic brands we're fortunate enough to call our clients, we feel that we're uniquely positioned to be able to kind of share insights, data, stories from across this client community. So the remainder of this brief intro this morning, or I guess afternoon, I'll be kind of sharing some of these stories across our client community and different trends we're seeing. So as I think we can all attest to, we'd already kind of been seeing this rapid acceleration in the adoption of the new definition of corporate purpose. And then COVID hit, suddenly thrusting the whole world into purpose as the bond that ties everyone together during this crisis, and sometimes exposing or exacerbating the major systemic and causal issues of inequity and vulnerability in this world. But we've really been seeing companies using their powers for good and finding ways to build connectivity, purpose, and meaning for their people. If you could go to the next slide, please, Seth. So why is it important that companies help to solve some of these issues of the world today? And again, we look at data. We've been seeing data illustrating that employees and consumers are actually looking to businesses now more than ever before to truly support people. For instance, when we look at the Edelman Trust reports from the past few years, we've seen business emerge as the most trusted institution and most competent. And so this is a huge opportunity for that people are actually looking to companies as the source of truth and support. I think these stats on the slide are pretty significant. Over 3/4 of employees actually expect their businesses to take action to protect employees and local communities during this crisis. Another 84% of millennials actually want their companies to help them identify ways to get more involved in their communities. So businesses have a huge responsibility right now. And what we're seeing is that it needs to also be done in a really authentic way, really empowering these employees. It can't just be PR or lip service, excuse me. So how are companies, to activate when the time comes, their employees? Well, we at Benevity obviously think that technology plays a big role in this. But when we look at the data coming from our client community, we've identified a couple key trends that we're seeing across the board. I'm going to touch on these three trends: reimagining volunteering, employee-led grants, and engaging in small acts of goodness to inspire action around power movement. So this first, volunteering. For the past few years, we've actually seen a number of our clients begin to really double down on skills-based volunteering and virtual volunteering. But then with the onset of COVID, the volunteering landscape really transformed overnight. And we've all kind of been scrambling, how do we take our more traditional in-person volunteering and make it more virtual? And we've been seeing two key things that clients across our client community of companies that reimagine volunteering successfully are first expanding the definition of volunteering, and then two, really doubling down on virtual volunteering. In the context of COVID, we've seen volunteering take the form of acts of kindness, like delivering groceries to a neighbor or making get well soon cards to people that are sick. And we've also seen companies rewarding these efforts with dollars for doers or volunteer grants. So next, I'll share just two quick examples of companies that I've seen doing this really well, but there are so many stories, and especially with this intimate group, I'll offer if this is something that you or your company is really trying to tackle, happy to share additional resources and stories from the community. Seth, would you move to the next slide, please? So a great example of expanding the definition of volunteering is Warner Brothers. So every April, Warner Brothers focuses specifically on volunteerism. Obviously, this April, shortly after COVID initially hit, they were unable to do the same sort of volunteering as they had done in the past. So they decided to redefine what volunteering meant. It was formerly giving time to a nonprofit of some sort. And they decided to open it up to virtual volunteering, to making small acts of kindness, and also small acts to promote health and wellness for the individual employee and or their community. And the really cool thing is that they didn't just expand this volunteer definition, but they also gave their employees $10 per hour for doing these actions. And what we saw is this drastically not only improved engagement across the employees, but also people felt much more connected and really happy to be able to participate in some way. One of my favorite examples of virtual volunteering, thank you, Seth, is SAP Global. There are so many really cool examples of virtual volunteering, and many of you are probably in the midst of doing some of it yourself. But I chose to share this example because it was really a win-win-win. It allowed SAP Global created this campaign called SAP Kids, where they connected SAP employees with kids with SAP employees without kids. The employees without kids, or those with kids that were able to donate their time, actually did one-on-one sessions with some of the kids by doing things like exercising, reading a book, or teaching some music. And it really went a long way, not only engage employees, they could engage with one another, kind of break down some of the isolation that this time brought. But it also allowed SAP employees to engage in skills-based volunteering and really feel a part of something bigger. So virtual volunteering is not going away. We only see it continue to grow. But next, I kind of wanted to switch gears with a second trend that we're seeing widely, and that's around employee-driven grants. Many of our clients have found that a great way to build employee pride and interest in their granting program is to more directly involve employees in their community investment programs. So we have seen clients asking their employees to nominate causes to receive grants. And we've seen this happen across the board of clients of all shapes, sizes, and industries. A glowing example of this that I'll share is with Adobe. The Adobe Employee Community Fund is an employee-driven grant-making program that supports organizations in addressing challenges affecting the communities where Adobe employees live and work. So each participating Adobe office is actually given a budget, and they are able to have their employees request grants for nonprofits that they're passionate about. The grants are $20,000, and they're typically very hyper-local to the geographic region of these offices. And we've really seen tremendous impact, not only through these generous donations, but also being able to have some of these employees that might not have their own personal funds to be able to donate at this time, actually be able to play a role in the whole granting process as well. Next, I'd like to touch on just my final trend before we move into the awesome panel. And that I've already alluded to it a little bit when I talked about reimagining and redefining volunteering. But we've been seeing companies take this to a whole new level by actively supporting their employees to make small acts of kindness, with the goal being to inspire action around movements. The recent movement against racial injustice has, I think, really shown us that change starts at the individual level. So whether it's attending a protest or signing a petition or donating to a nonprofit working on the ground, when you harness the power of individuals to support causes they really care about and you give them a platform to create change, this is where grassroots movements are really born. We've seen purpose-driven companies encouraging these small acts of kindness in many ways. I know that MK from Morton and Laura from NVIDIA will be sharing examples from their companies as well. So I'll be careful not to steal anyone's thunder. But at Benevity, we actually have a module that we call missions that allows for this. And I want to be clear, I'm happy to, I'll tell you a little bit about what this looks like, but you don't necessarily need to have this technological piece from Benevity to be able to inspire your employees around these acts of goodness. Seth, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next. So missions allows for employees to take small, bite-sized, pro-social actions related to huge topics like racial justice and equity or sustainability, COVID-19, mental health and wellness. During this election season, we launched missions related to civic engagement. And the idea behind it is that every person and every action counts. So if you're completing a mission related to sustainability, you can be doing something like cutting 2 minutes per day off of your shower and to save water. And then you can actually see how your small action, when taken with the small actions of others, ladders up to greater impact. So missions within the Benevity platform is gamified, and it allows our client partners to actually track the impact that you're making. But I think the important piece is less about the technology and more about what can happen when you empower employees to take small, easier to complete actions. Seth, if you could move to the next slide. So we've found that supporting employees to engage in these small acts of goodness leads to huge engagement. So not only do we see a large number of folks that didn't previously engage in goodness programs, so had never volunteered with the company before or given money through a platform, started to engage. We saw 38% have their entry into goodness, so to speak, be through missions. We also saw this technique of the small acts of kindness be able to reach folks that were different than before. So, the international workforce, folks that are in offices that aren't at the corporate home office, or remote and workforces. And I think the most important and kind of exciting thing that we saw is that once someone engaged in a mission or in these small acts of kindness, they then went on to engage and participate more. So it inspired them to go give money to a cause or to volunteer. I'll tell one quick story about this and then turn it over to the great panel. There are a ton of positive and powerful stories. One quick anecdote is what PayPal did around sustainability. In just 3 weeks, PayPal saw some significant, these small actions really add up. They saw 64% international participation. They also saw almost half of their employees engaging in ways to adopt food habits that lower emission or reduce paper use, unplugging their devices to really save energy as well. Just one amazing example of kind of the collective impact that can be made when you support your employees to take action around things that are important to them. So I have shared a ton of information with you today with the goal of really hopefully setting the stage for the talented women on the panel for the remainder of the webinar. And while we truly are living in unprecedented times, I've been really heartened to see the many ways that companies are supporting and encouraging their people to make impact. At the end of the day, the common thread is making it possible for your people to take action, volunteer, or give money to causes that are important to them. So thanks again, Seth. I'll turn it over to Laura, MK, Mila, and Shalane, and looking forward to hearing the conversation unfold.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine, for what was a perfect strategic overview of how this is happening across companies. And what we're now going to do is dig in and look at how this work is playing out in different company settings. And so I want to start with the panel by asking a kind of high level question, which is, how did you come to know that you needed to engage your employees? Then how have you done it and what's the outcome been? And I promise we're going to dig deeper, but just to kind of level set, I want to go into each of these case studies and kind of understand that global picture. And Laura, if you're open to it, we're going to start with you and hear about how NVIDIA has done this, and then we'll come to the other panelists. And I'll keep up the slide just briefly each time, and then I'm going to switch to kind of full screen mode so that you can see everyone as they're speaking from here forward. Laura, let me turn it over to you to be our first answer to that question.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Clemenson, and I work for NVIDIA. For those who might not be familiar with NVIDIA, it's a Silicon Valley-based tech company and inventor of the GPU, which stands for Graphics Processing Unit. If there's any gamers in the audience, you'll know, or gamers will know that we have our deep roots in gaming space, but over the years have diversified our business with a large focus now on artificial intelligence. So our technology is being used in a number of industries. My specific role is on the NVIDIA Foundation team, where we empower employees in giving back in the ways and to the causes that are most meaningful to them. Our programs are very open and very broad. We've been doing corporate social responsibility for many years now, and have found that the best path for this company is to have very broad programs. So instead of picking strategic focus in a specific cause area, really honing in on the interests of the employees and letting them choose the causes that they want to support, and we are there to provide the tools and the resources, including matching gifts, and we'll go into more ways that we support them as well. One particular example relevant to this discussion today that I'd like to talk about is, with our entire workforce working remotely this year, we could no longer support the community in the traditional ways of in a physical capacity, like in-person volunteering. So we have rolled out more virtual volunteering opportunities, like were suggested earlier. But we also have kept them engaged virtually by rallying them around various missions. We are a Benevity client, so those acts of goodness that Catherine mentioned. They're essentially sets of actions that employees can take on a variety of pressing social issues of the time. So we had an editorial calendar that we had set at the beginning of this year that included you know, sustainability topics like we're just on the screen a moment ago that PayPal had focused on. So conserving water and energy. And we quickly needed to shift our EdCal to address the current issues that we've all been facing. So this has included topics that began with the beginning of the year, supporting women in the workplace, and then quickly turned into coming together around coronavirus. We with everybody working remotely and away from their colleagues, we felt that through these acts of goodness, acts of good, acts of kindness, helping support one another through coronavirus in the community, but in a safe way, was the right direction to get people, to make them maintain connection. And then turn to mental health and resiliency. But shortly after the killing of Mr. George Floyd and the spotlight on the injustice that Black communities continue to endure, we knew that we had to do something in this area as well. So we partnered with we have an internal employee resource group called the Black NVIDIA Network that we partnered with to create a racial justice mission. And this mission encouraged employees to complete simple actions to make the world a more equitable place. Activities like reflecting on personal biases, learning about race and racial identity, diversifying their content, in addition to some of the actions that Catherine mentioned, like investigating petitions in their local communities, participating in peaceful protests if they felt that was a safe thing for them to do. But really it was around educating them and making sure that they were exposed to content to keep them engaged and helping the Black community, standing with the Black community during this time. So through this effort, employees they also donated to social justice organizations, and the company matched those contributions, just further amplifying the overall impact. So it ended up, something that we're very proud of, and proud of the employee groups working together and involving employees. And we're a global company. And so while this particular issue is at the forefront in the US, it's certainly something that has hit many communities across the globe. And we intentionally left these actions and promoted these activities and actions to our entire workforce, because we know that discrimination is felt in all communities, and based on race, religion, class, and so we wanted to make sure that everybody was able to learn and take action in this area.
Thank you, Laura, for a powerful entry point to this from the example of NVIDIA. And we're now going to move on to hearing how this has looked in a very different context, because Mortenson is a very different company. It's located in a different place in Minnesota. And so, MK, we want to hear from your perspective kind of how you've put this into action.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm with Mortenson. We are headquartered in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered. So that added another component for our team members here and how we could support them. But we also have locations throughout the country. And being an essential business, we have a lot of team members working from home, working remotely, but a lot of team members that are on the job site too. So we have a great pool and a great opportunity to go ahead and reach them either at the job site or at home working. What I will say is I am a social responsibility manager here at Morton, and we have been a Benevity client for just under a year. We started in November, so only about 6 months, well, only about a couple months when COVID hit, and then 6 months after the murder of George Floyd. So we were really thankful to have the support of Benevity, but I'll have to say in the very beginning, we made adjustments to how we give back earlier in the year as a result of the pandemic. And this adjustment helped us leverage Benevity when addressing the societal issues like racial justice in response to the murder of George Floyd. So the pandemic had already adversely impacted in-person volunteering, as well as monetary donations to our vulnerable populations and needy causes. So we were all trying to figure out how we could continue having a positive impact when our community resources were depleting just as fast as the need was growing. So at Morton, we took the opportunity, we took a step back to acknowledge the most basic purpose of our community impact program was improving our communities. And so we thought if we improve ourselves as individuals, we can go into our communities as better people and thus help improve our communities. So how this comes into play with the big picture resulting from COVID, one, we had less in-person volunteering. Even if team members wanted to volunteer, our community partners could not support it based on governmental restrictions, based on where in the country our team members were. Or the community partners were just not sure yet that early in the time frame of COVID, how to keep volunteers safe. So we had less in-person volunteering. And then second, with so many people facing the uncertainties of the pandemic, we had less people able or willing to donate to causes and the vulnerable populations. So we knew we had to augment how we were doing things in order to continue to kind of make an impact. A question actually that was posed earlier in the year, and I believe it was from another Benevity webinar, was how can we reimagine volunteering? And our answer to that was to include improving ourselves as individuals as a volunteer activity. So this started with our missions trial. So we had yet to go down the mission path with Benevity. We're slowly rolling things out, but we had a trial and we had COVID-19, mental health, eco-friendly living, and acts of goodness as missions. And those were available to our team members for self-improvement and personal growth. After a successful racial equity, racial justice, and Twin Cities Rebuild campaign, we developed racial equity and anti-discrimination activities in missions that were created in partnership with our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. Once we launched these activities around racial justice and anti-discrimination, we saw a 300% spike in missions participation. And this is a result of team members take action and to just be the solution to what was going on around us. So that was basically the start of our anti-discrimination take action offering. So even though our missions trial ended this summer, we've continued our take action volunteer activity. So we created new anti-discrimination activities for our Do Something Good annual campaign, which was in September. We kept some of the more foundational activities from our missions trial, like assessing unconscious bias, how to be an ally. But we also provided new opportunities for our team members to learn more and do more, because in September, they were in a very different spot than they were initially in May and June when it came to racial equity, racial justice, and understanding systemic racism. So that all takes us to today, where live in Benevity, we have launched our fourth quarter Take Action volunteer opportunity, which again includes enduring COVID-19, mental health, acts of goodness, and our anti-discrimination activities. So this is not something that will go away at Morton. It will evolve as we continue to be more educated, more experienced, as we make greater strides for equity, and as our team members look to us for more information and more ways to act and achieve change.
Thank you, MK. And I just want to echo one of those stats that you mentioned, which is that you came to the racial equity mission and saw a 300% increase in participation. And it really speaks to what Catherine was talking about and what we're seeing in the literature, that people really want to marry what they do every day with their search for meaning more broadly. And that has been a sea change, especially among younger people in the workplace. And what we're hearing from a lot of executives is that, you know, the old model was you didn't talk politics, you didn't talk about anything that might have any controversy around it. And increasingly, workplaces are understanding that that is core to people's lives. It's something that has to be both discussed and brought in. And then as they do it, they're actually seeing levels of participation that they've never seen before. And so just want to, kind of affirm what you're saying as a case study of a broader movement that we are absolutely seeing across all spaces, even in the corporate spaces where we might not have suspected them a year ago. We're going to come now to a nonprofit example, and there's a very intentional reason that we wanted to have a nonprofit example, that we have many nonprofit leaders on this webinar, and we wanted to make sure that we had truly relevant ideas for you, because you're not in a position where you'd have a foundation that can support that type of giving, or necessarily with the same resources of even having an incredible partner like Benevity. And still, you are being called to mobilize your people, and many of them are asking, how can we engage even beyond just the way our nonprofit is directly impacting these issues? And we immediately thought of Mila Skinner, who is Chief of Staff to the CEO at One Goal, one of the highest performing educational opportunity organizations in our country, as well as the managing partner of Quarter 5, a new consulting practice that she has launched around counseling nonprofits and companies that are going through change. And so, Mila, let me turn it over to you to share how you looked at these issues at One Goal.
Absolutely. Thank you, Seth. Thanks for having me. Happy Wednesday. I have a colleague who now just calls every day Happy Blur's Day, because every day is a blur. And so we don't know what day it is, but I'm pretty confident today is Wednesday. It's an honor to be here with you all and to see your lovely faces. As mentioned, I'm with One Goal. We are a national education equity organization. And very similar to many of you on the call, I think one would assume that the very nature of being a nonprofit in and of itself is an activation of employees in social justice issues. My answer is yes, it is. And there's work that we have to do to ensure that we are engaging in movements that move the work forward and addressing the core issues that result in us needing to do this work. And so just to give a little bit of information about One Goal, just so you have it, we're located in 6 states across the country. Our headquarters are in Chicago. We call the 6 states that we're in regional offices. We have about 165 employees on staff. We have the honor of providing partnership and support to nearly 13,000 young people across the country who we call fellows. Our mission is to close the degree divide in America. And so one example of how we are thinking about this work and have been thinking about this work, to my yes and point a moment ago, is about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, we went through an exercise and a process of re-envisioning and reimagining our mission and our vision for our organization along with our core values. And in this process, we asked ourselves a really core question. Is, as an organization that seeks to ensure that all young people have equitable access to education, and understanding that the inequitable access is ultimately a result of systemic racism and oppression and social injustice. So we know that the reason that young people don't have access to equitable education is because of a systemic issue, a systemic problem. The question we asked ourselves is, should our foundational work be about social injustice, or should it be about education? And similar to my earlier yes and, the answer that we came to with our staff and the way that we really thought about engaging is that it's both. They are inextricably linked. And so we work to dismantle systems of oppression through our lever, which is education. And so that is what we do. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we are an organization that focuses on education, understanding that in every single one of our activities, we are working to dismantle the systems of oppression that led to the inequity. And so what we realize, what we know, is that every interaction, whether it be with a student, whether it be with a principal, whether it be with a full school system or district, an educator, a partner, a donor, etc., is an opportunity for us to dismantle this system. It's not enough to simply get more kids to college, right, and to get a post-secondary degree. It's incredibly important, but we know it's not enough. What we have to do is make sure that we are working in those conversations, in that work to pursue education opportunities for our young people, to break down the system specifically the system within schools, which is built on injustice, is built on inequity. We are making sure that we are moving young people to a place where they understand their identity and how that identity is powerful, and how that identity and what they bring to our society and to our world has an opportunity to lead to the systemic change. And so we are constantly engaging from a place of, yes, education again is the lever that we have, but our ultimate outcome, the world in which we seek to be in and see, is one in which these systems are dismantled. And we do that through our partnerships with young people and with our staff, and understanding that it's not simply enough just to engage with people, but that we do it to really change the way that our systems are set up.
Thank you, Mila. That is a powerful and profound example of how you have seen the fullness of your mission and then really mobilized your teams to embrace it, and how incredibly powerful in this moment where everyone in the country is asking these questions and you actually have a significant part of the solution. We're going to come to Shalane Walker now, and Shalane is looking at all of this from a different angle, which is as an employee who is engaged. And we thought it'd be really interesting to share the social responsibility leaders and the chief of staff view, meaning people that are in the role of activating and reaching out. And then from the perspective of an employee who has now been activated and engaged, and who in particular has moved the needle on DEI at her company Wavemaker, where she is, as of October 1st, with hearty congratulations, the media director. I will also mention that Shalane and Mila are, for us, we are incredibly proud members of our Baumhart Scholars MBA. So we are enormously honored to have their genius as part of the Loyola community in these moments. And so let me turn it over to you, Shalane.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Steph. I always feel my self-esteem raise a couple of points after you introduce me. So yes, for those who are not familiar, Wavemaker is an advertising media agency under the WPP network. We like to say that 1 in 3 ads that you see is probably created or bought by a WPP agency. Currently working on the US Census, which the Supreme Court decided will end on the 15th, and transitioning to another government client to help with their flu and COVID messaging campaign coming up. Within Wavemaker, I've been there about 3 years, and my first entry into this was when there was an advertising tech conference in New York, and they had about 50 people on the panel, and they had 2 women and no people of color. And so, you know, I decided to email the conference CEO and tell them about it, and they thankfully had a very positive response. I then sent that email to my boss, not knowing what the company's response would be, but I did want them to know that I had done this, and I had done this with my Wavemaker signature. And their response let me know that this is a company I wanted to stay with. They said they were so thankful they had me. They were proud of me for using my voice, and actually ended up sending me to New York so I could attend the conference on the company's behalf, which I really appreciated. And I say that to say that that really set the foundation for me understanding that this is a place where me having a voice and speaking up for what I believe is important will be accepted, will be tolerated. And so if you are in a position of leadership, it really does start with you. You know, people care, but people also still have commitments. No one wants to lose their job necessarily for, you know, going out on a limb, and, you know, they may have great ideas, but are nervous of any potential negative feedback. A second example I'll give in that same vein was an idea I have for a mentorship program that, to start with, I had to, you guys are not doing what you need to do to retain our Black and Latinx employees. And again, that in itself was a very bold statement, but our CEO had told us that this was a safe work environment and that she wanted to hear from us. And so as an employee, really fostering that openness and speaking about it, not once a year on the annual town hall, but on a regular basis, helps the employees feel a lot more comfortable. And I can share a few more examples later as well.
Well, thank you, Shalane, and thanks to all of the panelists. I'm going to ask what I call a power round question, which means I'm hoping for your thoughts in 60 seconds or less, and then we're going to come to questions that are coming from our guests. And the question is, you've now seen into this world of activation. I am imagining many people are joining this because they are thinking about kind of how they go about mobilizing their teams. Are there some quick tips or lessons learned that you can share as advice to people that are thinking about, going out and beginning to engage their teams, especially if they want to embrace this moment and move into some of these areas that are less common for companies to have traditionally engaged with, like racial justice? And Laura, can we start with you for any tips you have?
Well, I don't know how I can top Shailene's example. I mean, I think just listen to your employees and where their passions are. I think, kudos to her for speaking up to her leadership team, and kudos to her leadership team for standing on that. And look, it made her proud to be with that company. So the other thing I would say is, if you're in a leadership position to create change at your company, just try to keep those efforts as open as possible to avoid alienating a particular group or cause. I think I started by, in the intro, explaining how we've shifted over the years from single focus cause areas to keeping our programs really broad. And we've just seen tremendous engagement from our employees, and overall just appreciation and their desire to want to get involved because they're able to support the causes that they care about.
Thank you, Laura. MK?
Yeah, I have a couple of tips and my own just personal perspective. I just have to say I'm a team member in a company where giving back is part of who we are. So we have this identity as a company exemplified by the highest levels of leadership. They encourage us to volunteer during work hours. So if you're not part of a company whose identity includes serving as a community member, I know it can be hard to know where to start. So one thing, it's a question I never favor. It's like, what is the business purpose for giving back? And I don't like that question because I feel like it's more of a heart purpose or helping or community. But I do feel if you want the support of leaders in your company, you may very well need to answer that question for them. What is a business purpose? And so to do that, I think start with where your passions lie or where you see a need in your community. Reach out to those community organizations, see how you and your company can help. But most importantly, ask that community partner, community organization, ask them to help you craft the why or the business purpose for your company leaders, because these organizations have a lot of information, a lot of answers to that question, what is a business purpose, whether it's giving back to them in particular, their cause category, or the community, because oftentimes these organizations have had to answer that question in order to even get started. The second tip I would say is I encourage you to partner with, say, committees or affinity groups at your company, team members with a like interest. So if your passions lie with anti-discrimination or equity, start with your inclusion and diversity committee. If it's, say, with veterans welfare, start with team members that are vets or even team members that are currently active. Making those relationships and kind of coming together of like, hey, what's our plan? What's our need? Where are we going to start? I think is good, because then it's not just, the burden isn't just on you, but I think any singular person can make a difference. Beyond those tips, I would say though, my perspective is that right now, there are things happening in this world that we absolutely cannot ignore. So whether it's the continued violence against people of color or staggering homelessness and hunger that's been amplified by the pandemic, or even the mounting number of people of all ages, all backgrounds who are dealing with anxiety and mental health issues, it would be irresponsible for us as individuals, but also as companies, to not get involved, simply to help. But if companies, if they don't do it to help, I would say do it to survive, because if your employees and their families who make up your community are not taken care of, do not feel safe, or actually not safe, your company's infrastructure will crumble. It will not be able to sustain itself in a community that is struggling. So that's really my perspective, more so than tips, but I think that's the most basic thing is there's so many ways to help and we just need to do it. It is a responsibility, it's imperative.
Well, thank you. Okay, it was a tip and perspective because you said that the tip is make sure to think about the business purpose, and then you shared it, and it is a powerful one. Viola?
Absolutely. So mine is very much aligned. It is about space creation. I think, unfortunately, we are in a time that is being driven by fear, and that fear leads us to avoid conversations, to avoid difficult topics. Many of us don't know what to say. We don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to offend anyone. What if we say this and we should have said that? And so we don't have the conversation. And the worry I have there is it pushes us further apart instead of bringing us closer together. And so what for me matters most in organizations is that you create space, that it doesn't have to be mandatory. People don't have to come, but people should know that there is space for them. There is no division in our life now between work and personal. And I think, Seth, you talked about this earlier on, if someone mentioned this, and that like, we are not in a society anymore where you turn off your like personal life and then you enter work. I mean, we have kids coming in and out. We have classes, our kids are learning in the background. We have our partners and spouses jumping in and walking behind us and other random things. And so there is no division anymore. And as a result, we need to allow people to bring their full selves to work and to engage in the conversations that move us forward. And so for me, it is very much to understand that these conversations are hard, but that we have to have them. And that to the extent that organizations, even if you're not a leader, but you are someone who can say, you know what, I want to hold a space for people to have a conversation, or I want to engage in that, we should all be willing to do that.
Shalane, you have our final word on this question.
Thank you again, Seth. So there are two pieces of feedback in addition to what I shared earlier. The first is that it can't just be coming from your HR or people and culture teams. It really needs to also be part of the business as well. And because if it's just the HR team, it feels like it's being forced on employees, right? It doesn't feel like it's something that's organic, that's coming out of the people who are doing the day-to-day to help the business run. The second thing is, I would call it protecting the time and making the time for employees. A lot of times, employees are asked to contribute to these initiatives, but they're also told to still do their day-to-day jobs, and there's not space given. Recently, we actually pushed for this. We said our employee resource group that we wanted them to create a DEI time code because we work in advertising and all of our hours are billable and these type of things. And they did. And that's now allowed them to see how much work this really is. And what we're hoping for is as we continue to track these hours, they'll begin to see the need for dedicated resources. So again, if it's not measured, it's not happening. And so just make sure you have those metrics in place. Oh, which also reminds me, we also added each employee to create their own version of a DEI goal. And that was something the whole company had to do. It's something they're all going to be measured against, including the CEO and C-suite who had to share their DEI goals with the entire agency for accountability.
That is a powerful example. And let's hope that as those goals get put in place, you look at a very different conference panel of speakers in 10 or 20 years from now. Patrick, you have our first question.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm wondering if the old model was, don't talk about politics or social issues at work. I'm wondering if the panelists have run into examples of old school executives, employees, board members pushing back on initiatives. So how was that managed?
So my hunch is that you have, because I see a lot of nodding, and I know that is currently like a huge question mark. And so, yeah, how have you engaged and in some cases persuaded? And MK, I see you unmuting, so you're going to be first here, if that's good. We'll make this popcorn style, whoever pops first.
Well, I actually, thankfully, we haven't had the resistance, but we are evolving. So after Mr. Floyd was killed, everything we had in our plan for our, at the time, IND committee was amplified and accelerated. So it was managed by a number of directors. Well, then we got one director in particular managing that committee. We changed it. Well, we had then listening sessions with all our team members, and we changed IND to diversity, equity, inclusion. So it's evolving. But one of the things that we say is that, to Mila's point, we heard from team members. We just had our flavor event, our second annual, which is where all people of color come in and just have conversations and talk about our needs and things like that. And it's also not just people of color, but a lot of what we heard is that, to Mila's point, like people are so paralyzed in fear. We're not doing anything because we're scared of saying the wrong things. And we are adopting progress over perfection. And so, and two, making space. I mean, I think that's all part of it. Unfortunately, we heard these stories about how people on a job site someone made a comment and maybe their intention wasn't to make it sound discriminatory, but the person took it that way. That is not a safe space. Those conversations, those stories need to be told, and additional training and everything needs to be implemented. So we're kind of still evolving in this phase, but I think to avoid it and to address it is to be open with it. And everyone has to understand we're all coming from a place of safety where you can say what you want to say, and we're taking it as intention is good. Intention is for something positive to happen. And if someone says something, the intention isn't to be hurtful, it's to voice it. And then from there, we can take whatever it is and navigate, okay, what's the next step? So I feel like I'm not very organized in this answer because there's so many ways to come about it. But so whether you get resistance or not, I think understanding where that resistance is coming from, ask that person. She also mentioned fear. You know, we're a construction company and this is old school white men, you know, not a lot of women, not a lot of people of color. And the people of color, what are your roles? Are you holding roles of senior leadership? And so we're very open in having these conversations, and it is uncomfortable, but it's a good uncomfortable because people feel safe in bringing about these points. So I feel like going back to, if you feel like you're getting a pushback, ask that person why. Understand what their fear is or what their concern is or what is threatening to them, and then address it from there. There's a reason, there's an underlying reason that may have nothing to do with race. So I think that's very important, is to just be direct, ask the question, ask and understand what that threat or concern is, and go from there.
Other comments on Patrick's questions?
I can chime in to add a little bit more color to what I put in the chat. So
yeah,
yes,
thank you, Shalene. But repeat what you put in the chat too, just so everyone hears it directly.
Sure. So we've had actually several employees in our company push back. We do a weekly town hall and people can post anonymously, so you'll see a lot of things. When we were doing matching donations for certain causes, someone said, why can't we do matching donations for conservative causes? You know, and our CEO put her foot down and said, human rights are not a, you know, conservative or liberal cause, they're a human cause. We had another example. We created a new channel called Brave Your Bias, where employees can submit articles. We use Teams, so similar to Slack, where employees can submit articles or thought pieces related to unconscious bias and helping us all kind of lift those veils that we have. And an employee posted that, you know, she didn't have any bias and these are all things. And this is just another example of reverse racism. And again, our leadership came into that channel and said, that's not how we feel. We're happy to have discussions about this, but as a company, we do believe this is an issue. Similarly, we had someone saying about like, they didn't want to put time towards this initiative because they didn't think it contributed to the business. And our, again, C-suite spoke up. So really, again, this is where I think leadership has to take a stand and understand that potentially you might have some employees who don't agree with that, but then that's not the kind of company you want to run. And I think leadership has to be comfortable with potentially losing people who are good at their jobs, but don't have the same values as the company. And I'm very thankful that my company has decided to take that stand.
And I'll just add a data point here that both BCG and McKinsey have done some research on how this benefits companies. And they find that there's actual performance when people say they feel more included, particularly when those are people of color and women, and that it actually leads to, I mean, significant, for example, EBITDA growth and other benefits. And what I'll just mention is that overwhelmingly what people say is, that they feel included when leadership makes it clear that it's a priority, even when it's tough. And so, you know, what Shalane is describing really is a best practice, especially in a creative industry where talent is ultimately, you know, your product and, you know, your everything for business success. I don't see anyone else jumping into this. I want to get to one more question before we end here, and we'll make sure to come, Laura and Mila, to you on this. Peter, I want to hear your question. I'm going to unmute you so you can ask it.
I was wondering if some of the companies could just talk about how we get as nonprofits, if there's opportunities we have, how do we get those in front of the employees, and what would make it easier for companies? What can we do on the nonprofit side to make it easier for you to help your employees get engaged?
So, you know, that may be especially for Catherine, MK, and Laura, although Mila, I'd love to hear maybe at the end just how you've done some of that work, because I know that you've partnered with, you know, companies in different ways at One Goal as an organization, and with employees sometimes in volunteering. But maybe we'll start with the three kind of on the business side, just to hear kind of how you look at nonprofits and cross-sectoral partnership.
I'm happy to go. So the first thing that pops into my head on this question is really around trying to get volunteers in the door. And through volunteers turn into donors, donors turn into advocates, perhaps even board members for your nonprofit. And then those advocates are extremely powerful in getting others involved. So those advocates could champion your nonprofit amongst their colleagues. Maybe those advocates participate in those affinity groups within the company and can garner more donations, employee grants, matching, kind of unlocks some funding in that way. But the volunteers, you know, to really get in the door and understand the challenges and the true work and impact that the nonprofit's having in the community.
Thank you, Laura. MK?
Sure. Well, in Benevity, there's over 2 million causes. So if you're a 501c3, you're probably in Benevity. But for Mortensen on our website, you know, if you go to the website and you're a cause, a nonprofit, you can reach us and say, hey, you know, I have this cause and we're in this location, and we have community impact teams across the country. So if you're in Denver, you would go to Christina, who's there, and you can start a relationship with her if you have a volunteer opportunity. Or we have a lot of virtual galas happening now because those in-person fundraisers are no longer really permissible. So we've created gala events and virtual silent auctions and things like that for causes. And so I would just encourage you to reach out to companies, go to their website, see if there's a way for you to contact those who are in charge of social responsibility. And we're always looking for community partners. I mean, we have long-standing partnerships with United Way, the Link, and whatnot, and these are well before I came to Mortensen. So I would just say, take the initiative, go to these websites, go to these companies you want to partner with, and just reach out to them and start that way.
Mila, can we turn to you for a final word?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the pieces that have been named around volunteerism, around donations, those are incredibly important to nonprofits. Anybody who works in a nonprofit knows how incredibly important those are. The third piece that I would add, just to build on, is around education. And so what I mean by that is, how do we support people in the for-profit space to understand the issues in which we are working in and across, understanding that people, yes, they give money, but we want people to give money because they understand the fundamental issue in which we are trying to solve. And how you as a business owner, a business leader, an employee can contribute to improving those issues. And so even as a parent, how are you thinking about education for your kids, and what supports are your kids getting that maybe other kids aren't getting? And so that you just have more access to the information, that creates a better and more profound relationship between for-profits and non-for-profits, in my opinion. And so even if there's not dollars or volunteerism, how do you bring what one goal does to your organization to understand what we're doing, or any other nonprofit, I think is a huge opportunity.
Well, I will just echo that opportunity, because what we believe is key to these partnerships is that both bring true value. And I think too often nonprofits sometimes just fall into the habit of just accepting volunteers rather than thinking about what's the distinctive knowledge and unique asset that we have, and how do we truly bring that to enrich our corporate partner, and also to ultimately solve the bigger mission that Viola talked about earlier of the organization, because these social injustices reflect a lack of awareness and understanding. And so what a perfect way to end as we talk about engaging our employees in social impact, that we can have these multiple dimensions of volunteerism, of education, of understanding, of giving. And I just want to say that this was an absolutely phenomenal group of speakers. I mean, I felt like each of you, I have takeaways, I had goosebumps at moments, and I am enormously grateful to all of you. And I know there are many companies that are on here that will be different and better, and have greater goodness, since that's the term of this hour, thanks to your insights and your sharing your best practices. So thanks to everyone, and especially our incredible speakers for sharing their insights.